now Burkina Faso and Moscow have formalized their partnership. In Moscow, the two countries signed what they call an agreement on the foundations of relations. The framework replaces the previous cooperation structure between the two states. Both sides describe it as the beginning of a new strategic phase.
When discussions turn to Russia's expanding role in Africa, the conversation usually follows a familiar script: soldiers, weapons, gold, and oil. But what is Russia's most significant move on the continent has little to do with military power or natural resource. What if its most consequential strategy is unfolding quietly through infrastructure that could shape Africa for generations? Across the continent, a suitable transformation is taking place, not on battlefields, but in energy ministries, international agreements, and long-term contracts that rarely make headlines. Through its state-owned nuclear corporation, Rosatom, Russia has been signing cooperation agreements, training African engineers, financing nuclear projects, and building long-term partnerships that extend far beyond electricity generation. This is about more than producing power. It's about becoming part of the system that keep modern economies running. Nuclear energy projects are designed to operate for decades, creating relationships that can last half a century or more. In many cases, they involve continued cooperation on fuel supplies, technical maintenance, specialized training, and regular and regulatory support long after construction is complete. From large-scale projects in North Africa to cooperation agreements in parts of East Africa and elsewhere, Russia is presenting itself as a partner capable of helping countries address one of their greatest development challenges: reliable electricity. For many African nations, dependable energy is essential for industrial growth, healthcare, transportation, and economic expansion. Unlike intermittent energy sources that depend on weather conditions, nuclear power can provide continuous electricity throughout the year. However, nuclear energy also represents a long-term commitment. Once a country adopts its technology, it often enters into decades of cooperation involving financing, technical expertise, fuel supply, maintenance, and workforce development. These long-term relationships inevitably influences both energy policies and strategic planning. One of the clearest examples is Egypt's Dabaa Nuclear Power Plant. Built in cooperation with Russia, the project is valued at approximately 29 billion and is largely financed through a long-term Russian state loan. The scale of the investment reflects a partnership expected to continue for decades through construction, operations, maintenance, and technical support. Rather than offering only reactor technology, Russia has pursued a broader approach by combining financing, engineering services, workforce training, and operational support into a comprehensive partnership package. To understand why this strategy has gained attention across Africa, it is important to understand a fundamental reality. For many African countries, one of the greatest barriers to economic development is not a lack of ambition or resources, but limited access to reliable electricity. Across much of the continent, power shortage remain a persistent challenge. Interruptions to electricity supply affects industries, healthcare facilities, schools, and businesses. Manufacturers often face production delays because electricity is inconsistent. Hospitals frequently depend on backup generators, and many businesses must allocate substantial resources to alternative power sources. Although Africa is home to more than 1.4 billion people, its total electricity generation remains relatively low compared with many highly industrialized economies. Different energy sources each have their own limitations. Hydroelectric generation depends on rainfall and water availability. Solar power requires storage systems to provide electricity when sunlight is unavailable. Natural gas infrastructures requires pipelines, stable security conditions, and significant investment. As a result, many governments are increasingly focused on securing dependable baseload electricity, power that remains available around the clock regardless of weather or seasonal conditions. This is where nuclear energy becomes part of the discussion. Once operational, nuclear power plants can generate large quantities of continuous electricity for many decades. They have the potential to support industrial zones, transportation networks, expanding sites, and energy intensive manufacturing without interruptions associated with some other energy sources. Western countries have long recognized the strategic importance of nuclear energy. However, African governments have found that pursuing civilian nuclear cooperation through Western partners can involve lengthy approval processes, complex financing arrangements, strict regulatory requirements, and extensive policy conditions. Russia has positioned itself differently. Through Rosatom, it offers integrated partnership that combines financing, plant design, construction, fuel supply, maintenance services, technical assistance, and the education of local specialists. The company also supports scholarship programs that allows African students to study nuclear engineering and related scientific disciplines in Russia, helping participating countries develop domestic technical expertise over time. For governments seeking long-term solutions to chronic electricity shortages, this comprehensive approach has become an increasingly important part of Africa's evolving energy landscape. Nuclear energy offers African nations more than electricity. It represents an opportunity to accelerate industrialization, reduce chronic energy shortages, and provide the reliable power needed to drive factories instead of relying on imported manufactured goods. This helps explain why countries including Egypt, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Niger, Uganda, Rwanda, Ghana, and Burkina Faso have all entered into various forms of nuclear cooperation with Russia. For many of these governments, the decision is driven less by geopolitical ideology than by the urgent need for dependable electricity to support long-term economic growth. Russia's nuclear engagement in Africa is not designed to deliver immediate political victories. Instead, it is built around long-term influence. Unlike commodities such as oil, which can be extracted and traded relatively quickly, nuclear energy creates partnership that often lasts between 40 and 60 years. It is this long-term relationship that gives the strategy its significance. When Russia states nuclear cooperation, Rosatom signed an agreement with African countries. The agreement extends far beyond constructing a power plant. It establishes a comprehensive partnership that reaches into multiple areas of national development. A nuclear power station requires enormous capital, often amounting to tens of billions of dollars, an investment that many African countries cannot easily fund on their own. Russia frequently provides state-backed loans that covers a substantial share of these construction costs because repayment is spread over several decades and linked to future electricity revenues. The financial relationship naturally becomes long-term once a country commits to such a project. Ending that partnership becomes far more complicated. The second element is technology. Russia designed reactors rely on Russian engineering, fuel assemblies, software, safety systems, and technical standards. Even when the facility is located entirely on African soil, much of its core technology originates from Russia. Nuclear fuel must continue to be supplied. Spent fuel requires specialized management, and major upgrades depend on the original technology provider. As a result, the host country remains connected to Russia's nuclear supply network for many years. Another important component is human capital. Engineers, technicians, scientists, and regulators are trained through Russian educational institutions and technical programs. Scholarships allow African students to study nuclear science in Russia, while partnerships between universities and regulatory agencies help develop local expertise over time. This produces generation of professionals whose experience and technical knowledge are closely linked to Russian systems and standards. This represents a form of soft power that is structural rather than symbolic. Unlike military agreements, which can sometimes be suspended or replaced relatively quickly, nuclear infrastructure becomes deeply integrated into a country's national electricity grid. A nuclear power plant cannot simply be disconnected in the same way that a defense contract can be cancelled. For this reason, nuclear energy carries considerable geopolitical significance. It creates enduring connections involving electricity generation, financing, technical expertise, regulations, and long-term national planning. From Russia's perspective, this relationship can continue regardless of elections, changes in government, or shifts in diplomatic relations. For African governments, however, these agreements may provide an opportunity to strengthen industrial capacity without depending entirely on traditional Western partners. At the same time, they also raise important strategic questions. Who controls the nuclear fuel supply? Who determines future pricing? And if political relations deteriorate decades from now, how easily can these partnerships be adjusted? Russia's nuclear ambition in Africa extend well beyond a single country. The cooperation agreements now span North Africa, the Sahel, East Africa, and parts of West Africa, reflecting a continent-wide strategy. One of the most advanced projects is taking shape in Egypt. At El Dabaa, Rosatom is constructing a large multiple reactor nuclear power plant that is expected to become one of Africa's most significant sources of electricity. Built with modern pressurized water reactor technology, the project has been progressing through multiple construction phases, with the first generating unit expected to enter service later this decade. Russia is financing most of the project while also committing to provide nuclear fuel under long-term supply agreements. For Egypt, the project represents a major expansion of its energy infrastructure. For Russia, it serves as a flagship example of how long-term nuclear partnerships can establish a lasting presence on the African continent. Ethiopia is pursuing a similar path, seeking reliable electricity to support its growing economy. The country has signed agreements with Russia covering the planning and future development of its nuclear power station. These agreements extend beyond construction plans, including technical cooperation, workforce training, and the creation of the regulatory institutions required to manage a civilian nuclear program. Rather than being a single infrastructure project, it represents the foundation for a future nuclear energy sector. In Niger, Russia's approach reflects the country's strategic importance as one of the world's leading uranium producers. Cooperation between the two countries has included agreements covering both peaceful nuclear development and uranium-related activities. From Russia's perspective, Niger is significant not only as a potential future user of nuclear technology, but also as a supplier of one of the most essential raw materials used in the global nuclear industry. These projects illustrate that Russia's engagement in Africa's nuclear sector extends beyond individual power plants. It represents a broader strategy aimed at building long-term partnerships across the continent through energy infrastructure, technology cooperation, education, and resource development. Russia's nuclear engagement in Africa extends far beyond a handful of headline projects. To date, at least 15 African countries have signed some form of nuclear cooperation agreement with Rosatom. This partnership ranges from technical training and research centers to feasibility studies, regulatory support, and long-term energy planning. Countries including Algeria, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, the Republic of Congo, Tanzania, Ghana, and South Africa have all explored different forms of cooperation, whether through workforce development, infrastructure planning, or the creation of future nuclear roadmaps. Taken together, these agreements reveal a broader strategy. Each partnership establishes another long-term connection, linking Russian technology, nuclear fuel technology, expertise, and regulatory standards with an increasing number of African states. Viewed individually, these agreements may appear unrelated, but viewed collectively, however, a clear pattern emerges. Russia is not exporting nuclear reactors. It is integrating itself into national energy systems, helping to train the engineers who will operate these systems, participating in the development of regulatory institutions, and in some cases, strengthening access to strategic resources such as uranium. The significance of this approach is that Russia's involvement does not end once construction is completed. Long after a reactor begins producing electricity, cooperation continues through fuel supply, maintenance, technical support, software updates, safety oversight, and specialist training. These relationships can continue for decades. From this wider perspective, they are not isolated business deals. They represent components of a broader strategy aimed at establishing a lasting presence within Africa's future energy landscape. To understand why this matters, it is necessary to look beyond electricity generation alone. This is not simply an energy story, it is also a geopolitical one. Few technologies reshape relations between countries as profoundly as nuclear power. When a nation builds a nuclear power plant, it is not merely purchasing equipment, it is entering into a partnership that can last a century or more. Fuel supplies, maintenance programs, safety systems, technical standards, operator training, and emergency procedures often remain linked to the original supplier throughout the facility's lifetime. This is where Russia's strategy becomes particularly significant. By constructing a nuclear infrastructure across Africa, Moscow is not only exporting technology, it is building a long-term strategic relationship that may endure through multiple generations of political leadership. For decades, much of Africa's energy sector has been influenced by Western financial institutions. Multinational energy companies and development agencies' infrastructure financing has often been accompanied by policy conditions, while energy cooperation has frequently been tied to broader diplomatic and economic priorities. Russia presents a different model. Its message to many African governments is straightforward. Infrastructure can be financed, constructed, and supported without enhancing broader political conditions to the partnership. For governments seeking to expand electricity generations while maintaining greater policy independence, this approach can be appealing. This dynamite has become increasingly important, and at a time when sanctions, trade restrictions, and financial pressure have become common features of international policies. For decades, for countries concerned about relying too heavily on any single geopolitical bloc, partnerships outshine traditional Western frameworks may be viewed as a way to diversify their strategic options. At the same time, these agreements also introduce new forms of dependence. Nuclear reactors require continuous fuel supplies, specialized spare parts, technical expertise, software support, and regulatory cooperation. When these elements are closely tied to one supplier, ending or replacing the relationship becomes extremely difficult, even if political circumstances change. This explains why governments in the United States and Europe closely monitor Russia's expanding role in Africa's nuclear sector. For decades, Western countries have played a leading role in setting international nuclear standards, supplying fuel and shaping global safety frameworks. Russia's growing presence introduces a significant new competitor into the landscape. China also recognizes the long-term strategic importance of civilian nuclear technology and has expanded its own international nuclear partnership, creating another dimension of competition for influence across developing markets, including Africa. As a result, the continent is becoming an increasingly important arena where major powers compare not only through trade and infrastructure, but also through long-term energy partnerships. For African nations, this competition presents both significant opportunities and important challenges. On one hand, nuclear energy offers reliable continuous electricity capable of supporting industrialization, expanding manufacturing, powering transportation systems, strengthening digital infrastructures, and reducing dependence on fossil fuels. Stable electricity remains one of the most important foundations of modern economic development. On the other hand, long-term infrastructure projects require careful negotiated agreements, transparent governance, and strong domestic institutions. Without these safeguards, countries risk exchanging immediate energy gains for future strategic dependence. Ultimately, Russia's nuclear engagement is about much more than generating electricity. It concerns who will shape Africa's energy systems, influence technological standards, and remain an essential partner for decades to come. This leads to a broader question. Are African governments choosing Russia because they believe it offers the strongest long-term solution for their energy needs, because its financing and partnership model better matches their priorities, or because it provides an alternative to traditional sources of international cooperation? Whatever the answer is, one point is increasingly clear. Russia's expanding nuclear partnership across Africa are neither accidental or temporary. They represent a deliberate long-term strategy aimed at strengthening Moscow's global influence in an area when traditional sources of geopolitical power are evolving. For Africa, this strategy arrives at a pivotal moment. Rapid population growth, urbanization, and industrial expansion are driving an unprecedented demand for reliable electricity. Renewable energy technologies such as solar and wind continues to grow rapidly, but they also face challenges related to intermittency and energy storage. Hydroelectric power remain vulnerable to changing rainfall patterns. The wind fossil fuels are increasingly affected by price volatility, environmental concerns, and political uncertainty. Within this context, nuclear energy is viewed by many policymakers as one possible path forward long-term energy security. A single nuclear power station can generate electricity for millions of people while providing a consistent base load power needed to support large-scale industrial development. Yet, nuclear power is more than an infrastructure project. It is a complete technological, financial, regulatory, and strategical ecosystem, one capable of shaping a country's energy future for generations. Once a country commits to nuclear energy, it is making a decision that would shape its future for generations. Nuclear fuel cycles extend over decades, radioactive waste must be managed for centuries, and the responsibility for maintaining safety never truly ends. In many cases, the political relationships created by nuclear projects last far longer than the government that originally approved it. This is why African countries must approach these partnerships with careful planning and strong institutions. The challenge is not nuclear energy itself. Around the world, many countries have successfully used nuclear power to support industrialization, strengthen energy security, and drive economic growth. The greater challenge lies in how these agreements are negotiated and managed. Without robust regulatory institutions, transparent contracts, and long-term national planning, countries risk being overly dependent on existing partners. If local engineers, scientists, and regulators are not adequately trained, technical expertise will remain concentrated outside the country. If agreement lacks transparency, long-term costs can become increasingly difficult to manage, and if oversight institutions are weak, maintaining the highest safety standards becomes far more challenging. And in that scenario, what begins as a path towards energy independence could gradually evolve into a new form of strategic dependence. Russia's approach reflects an understanding of these realities. Through Rosatom, it offers comprehensive packages that includes financing, construction, fuel supply, maintenance, technical support, and workforce training. For governments seeking rapid infrastructural development, this integrated model can be highly attractive because it simplifies what will otherwise be an enormously complex undertaking. Yet, every comprehensive solution carries long-term implications. The central question is not simply who builds the reactor, but who controls the technologies, supply chain, and expertise that keep it operating throughout its lifetime. For African countries, the long-term objective should be to use nuclear partnership as a foundation for developing domestic capacity by investing in local expertise, strengthening the independent regulatory institution, negotiating balanced agreements, and maintaining a diversified international partnership. Nuclear energy can be a powerful tool for sustainable industrial development. However, if nuclear projects are approached primarily as political achievements rather than long-term national investment, there is a risk that one form of dependence could gradually be replaced by another. Over the coming decades, access to reliable energy will influence far more than electricity generation. It will shape industrial competitiveness, economic resilience, technology advancement, and the stability of nations to make independent strategic decisions. Countries with secure and reliable energy systems are often better positioned to negotiate internally, withstand external pressures, and pursue their own development priorities. Russia clearly recognizes the strategic value of long-term energy partnerships, which helps explain why civilian nuclear corporations have become such an important part of its engagement with Africa. As for African governments, this central question is no longer whether nuclear energy has a role to play in the continent's future. The more important question is how these partnerships are structured, with national interests they ultimately serve, and whether they strengthen Africa's long-term capacity to control its own energy future. Tell us what you think in the comment section below, and please do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Thanks for watching.